It is Friday, June the 10th, 2022, and we're pleased to have Lieutenant Colonel, retired from the U.S. Army, and currently Campbell County Mayor, E.L. Morton. Mayor, thank you for taking time for us today.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
Well, anybody listening knows why you're here, what we're talking about, General Carl Steiner. I thought, hey, what a great opportunity to just spend some time and talk about the general. You know, you hear bits and pieces here and there, quick story, maybe take a little time and talk about him, and maybe get some of our folks who are listening that might want to share a story or maybe share a thought. But perhaps starting with you first, you enlisted in the U.S. Army, spent a career there in war. Take us through your career to kind of set the stage as we talk about the general, if you would.
Okay. Well, at a young age, we experienced the Vietnam War on the 6 o'clock news here, and that was my parents' generation. My dad got out of the Marine Corps actually in '63 and came home, but lots of his peers were there. Lots of my mom's high school classmates from Honolulu, where she was raised, wound up in the war, and her brother was there. And so I always felt like we owed a tremendous debt to those guys that served, and certainly all the generations before, but I saw what those guys were going through, and my parents made sure I understood how big a sacrifice it was. And so I always wanted to serve, and when the National Guard came to Jacksboro in, I think it was 1981, my dad actually enlisted, went back in, and so he was a Marine when he got out, but he went back in the Army National Guard, and about a year and a half later I enlisted and went to basic training about 8 days after graduating high school here at Campbell County High School. And so spent that summer at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and graduated basic training about 8 days before I wound up at East Tennessee State University trying to go to college. So enrolled in ROTC there, spent a year there. I was dating my wife, Elaine, at the time. We were high school classmates, and she was at UT. So the next year I decided to come home and finish the ROTC program at University of Tennessee. And I finished it in 2 years because I was in the National Guard already. And so finished that in 1985, commissioned second lieutenant of armor at that point in time because I was assigned, I'd left the Jacksboro unit and transferred to the Clinton unit, which had tanks, the M48A5 tank down there. So served there. They transitioned that unit to a signal and support unit, and I wanted to stay with the bullet launchers, and so I wound up in the Sweetwater National Guard unit and stayed there until I finished at UT in December '88 and reported for active duty with orders as an infantry officer to Fort Benning, Georgia at the infantry officer basic course. Over the next year, I finished officer basic course, the airborne school, and ranger school. Graduated those. I actually reported to Fort Bragg in June of '89. Elaine and I got married there. I was injured in ranger school, and they said, you're going to go on to Fort Bragg. And so Elaine and I had planned a wedding in September when I graduated ranger school. So things got accelerated. We went ahead to Fort Bragg. I signed in and was assigned to 1st Battalion, the 505th Infantry and 3rd Brigade, and General Stiner was commanding Fort Bragg. He was 18th Airborne Corps Commander, which included the 82nd Airborne Division. So I didn't tell too many folks that he was from my hometown until I went back and finished Ranger School that October, because you're kind of second-class citizen if you're not Ranger qualified in the 82nd Airborne Division.
Gotcha.
So I came back and was assigned as a platoon leader in the Anti-Armor Company in Delta Company, 1st 305, and conducted Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I was the 5th gun truck, actual armed truck, to roll off in Saudi Arabia to establish the line in the sand that President Bush had declared. So we had a 50 cal machine gun on it, had anti-armor missiles on it, and everybody else kind of followed us. But we first had to defend the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from the 4th largest mechanized army in the world in Iraq at the time. And so our soldiers did great. We invaded. My unit went forward with the 18th Airborne Corps in the western part of the theater. We assaulted across into Iraq at a mountain range that looks a lot like ours, except it had no trees on it. But the desert separates, the tectonic plates just shift. there on the Saudi-Iraqi border in the western portion. And so we had engineers actually cut roads, a zigzag road into it, and you just come up over the top, and it's a plateau out there. And so we assaulted to the Euphrates River. The last map sheet I had said and so that's where Abraham's from. It's the biblical and Talil Airfield was there, and the Iraqis had several MiG-21s on it, close air support and air-to-air combat aircraft, and so we assaulted in and took that airfield. And little did I know, about 3 days later, we discovered that the Tower of Babel was in line of sight from us, about 4 miles, and you could actually see a rubbled mass out there. And there was a curator there that stayed there during the war to tell everybody that would come that this is the base of the Tower of Babel. So it was a surreal experience to be there and to see things in the biblical historical context in the modern day. And I talked to God a few times and I'm like, God, why did you put us here? And we understood it was important, but I don't think I would have stayed in the Army if we hadn't have conducted that operation and actually gone to battle on behalf of our country and realized what purpose was in it for us.
Let me interject here. There was a time that General Steiner came to First Baptist Church. Well, he was there every Sunday generally, but and spoke and brought from the days of Abraham to current times, told the story, the connection. You mentioned Abraham.
Sure.
Obviously, General Steiner was an influence on you before you got to the JROTC. And again, but continue with
Sure. But we returned to Fort Bragg, and General Steiner had changed command and gone to Special Operations Command by the time we had redeployed from Desert Storm. And as we redeployed back south, the 18th Airborne Corps commander at the time was General Gary Luck. And so he came and said and met us at the border and was shaking our hands and came through. And he said, General Steiner sends his greetings and congratulations to all of you. I'm your new Corps commander. I'm Gary Luck. And, oh, by the way, Lieutenant Morton, you made the captain's list. So congratulations, well done. And we came back and redeployed to Fort Bragg and spent another 6 or 8 months there before going back to Fort Benning, where all infantry guys go. Spent 4 years down there training lieutenants and commanding a company in the airborne school. And of course, General Steiner's history is in the airborne units, and so he was airborne qualified way early on, and so it was an honor to serve there. We trained 4,000 novice paratroopers while we were there, and so after that, that was actually my last airborne assignment, and then we went on to work with the National Guard units in Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi. Then a trip to Korea, working on strategic operations and plans over there, and came back and was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, where I was executive officer for an infantry battalion there, 3rd at 327. Then I had a tour and recruiting command, and so I worked in Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee in recruiting command. So back home in Appalachia for a little while, and all the while, General Steiner's kind of keeping up with all us Tennessee boys and Campbell County boys that were out there serving. And Hank Hamlin actually was in the recruiting command at the same time. And I know General Steiner had referred him out for a general's aid job. So fast forward a couple years there, we finished up at Fort Campbell recruiting command, went to Fort Knox to start working on future combat systems to develop new weapon systems and communication systems there, and wound up with orders to go to Afghanistan. And while I was in theater there, Hank was a general's aide and came in, and we actually communicated over email while he was there, but he flew through my sector there, and he said that General Steiner had referred him for the general's aid job, then he got it. So, but he was aide to the explosive ordnance disposal commander, and Lansdowne Hill actually served in that capacity when he was in service. So, but the general had his fingerprints all over all of us, and And the senior officers I worked for, they all knew they wanted General Steiner's blessings, in every job that they had. He was affectionately and respectfully known as Country Carl at Fort Bragg because of his southern mannerisms, but very respectfully revered as Country Carl. But everybody knew that he loved them, but he was going to train them hard and be very demanding. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't toe the mark, you'd probably have to go somewhere else to work. But everybody loved General Steiner. And the thing that probably hasn't been said so much, if you were his enemy on the battlefield, you're in trouble. He was the most competent warfighter I've ever known. And I think that was his reputation the world over. So
we're visiting with Campbell County Mayor E.L. Morton, retired Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army. You're crossing paths with General Steiner over the years. You mentioned the warrior that he is. What was he like you were under his command?
Plain spoken, soft spoken. I when I first got to Fort Bragg, I was healing up. I was injured going back to Ranger School. I got a 30-day detail. The Army was going to come in and show all the support systems that they had, and we had a big expo, basically. I had about 30 acres sitting there with all kinds of different displays of weapon systems and communication system. We set up a bakery. We had a locomotive in on the rail. The Army owns all that equipment. Mm-hmm. And it was right across the road from General Steiner's headquarters. And he had a project officer from the 18th Airborne Corps, Lieutenant Colonel Ed Murdoch, and he'd been selected for battalion command and had about another 6 months there. And I was tasked to take this on, and we would keep 30 soldiers from my battalion there to support it. We had inflatable decoys, and so our soldiers would be out inflating those. The public was invited, so we had trash can duty and sweeping duty and parking lot duty, and it was extremely hot out there. But Lieutenant Colonel Murdoch said, we're not going to fail because the general is coming on Wednesday. We're going to set up Monday, and he said, we're going to have the public in here, and that's your trial run. He said, if the general's unhappy with anything, it's going to be your head. I said, okay, sir, I don't intend to fail on this one. So we had 30 soldiers down there, and we kept it clean. And they had actually a one-star general came in from Fort Lee to help set all of it up. And he said, you got to help me handle this 3-star over here across the road. He's coming Wednesday. I said, yes, sir. I said, I know that general. He's from my hometown. And he said, then you better put a good chip in for me. I said, well, all I can do, sir, is go to work out here and make sure we do a good job. But that Wednesday, the entourage came over, and General Steiner's operations officer was a colonel named Needham, and he was from New Jersey, and he didn't speak. He spoke very loud in a very heavy New Jersey accent, but his reputation preceded him, and his nickname was Nukem Needham. So he said, Colonel Murdoch told me, he said, my boss, Nukem Needham, is coming here on Tuesday to check you out. And Tuesday was rather an ordeal with Colonel Needham.
Prior to your Wednesday event.
Prior to the Wednesday event, but we were wired tight, and about 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, General Steiner walked through, and I said, and I saluted him when he came over, and I said, sir, greetings from La Follette, Tennessee. I'm your neighbor back home. And he said, Morton, he said, I think my dad's traded some cattle with your dad. I said, yes, sir. I said, we've got a display out here, and we worked real hard, and I think these soldiers are going to make you proud today. He said, lead on, show us the way through. So
it went well.
It went extremely well. It did. But he also had people like Colonel Needham and Colonel Murdoch over the top of me that weren't going to let me fail if I gave an honest effort.
Right.
And so it was very foreign to me. I'd never set up an equipment expo before, but the American soldiers amazed me. They amazed me for 26 years, and that was a walk in the park compared to the combat duty that those guys had on other occasions. So, but that's how General Steiner approached folks. Now, I'm sure if he'd seen something at the higher level he was dissatisfied with, it was probably a rough day for the person responsible for it. But when you train people and you gain their respect, they'll do everything in their power not to let you down. Mm-hmm. And so that was the common thread with the people who worked for General Carl Wade Steiner.
Well, at one point, did he have about 70,000 men under his watch?
Oh, yes, sir. 18th Airborne Corps is at Fort Bragg and certainly commands the 82nd Airborne Division down the street, but also commands the 101st Airborne Division. At the time, it was the 24th Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, an armored cavalry squadron that was, I think at the time, was at Fort Polk, Louisiana, had the 5th Mechanized Infantry Division at Fort Polk, Louisiana, a separate armor brigade at Fort Knox. So he commanded most of the Army deployable units east of Mississippi River in the continental United States, and was responsible to respond in every other area of the world if the event of war occurred.
Well, how would you describe General Steiner for an average bear like me? He was the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Special Operations Command at MacDill Air Force Base there near Tampa. How would you describe him that we can understand exactly what his role was in the world representing the United States?
So he had to understand the capabilities of all those units under him. What I described there are the conventional units. You know, we line up and we fight the opposition on the battlefield in that scenario. His background also included so many special operations assignments where they did what we called asymmetrical warfare. You know, you would have agents, you would have spies, you would have people detailed and skilled in snatch missions, go in and grab a human target and remove it from the battlefield, you know, in a very precise motion. You know, those special operations missions were, you know, combined operations with Air Force, Navy, Army, Marine units out there that did those special, smaller, focused missions out there that would go after what we called high-value targets. So he understood all those capabilities. You know, throughout his career, you can see those assignments. It was his job to put the right asset against the right enemy. And if that meant putting, you know, 6,000 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division in, their specialty is to seize an airfield in a theater, open the airfield so we can flow forces in. And at the same time, the Marine Corps' job is to gain a seaport. So Army grabs the land airfield, Marines, Navy grab the seaports, we connect, and we flow all of our forces in. In a scenario like Korea, it's very well rehearsed. In forced entry scenarios like Afghanistan, you got to go in and grab it for the first time. And so the general would do the mission analysis and assign the missions out to the units that are best suited to carry them out, and then resource them while they're on the battlefield. And oh, by the way, he led from the front. He jumped into Panama with everybody that went in.
So he was a frontline guy.
Absolutely. The general's command post would be, you know, right there behind the main effort units.
Now, is that common or uncommon?
I think it is common. It is common. Our soldiers believe because our leaders are forward. Now, you don't put your command post right in the teeth of the enemy, but you keep it close enough to where you can understand the battle space and change it. And so the separate brigade I described at Fort Knox that was under his command was designed to be a large, flexible reserve. And so the divisions would fight forward, but he kept this separate brigade in the back that was about the size of a third of the size of a division. And so if there was ever a place where you need to plug a hole, or if you saw success you wanted to exploit and go forward even harder, you know, he would make those decisions on plugging and playing there to succeed at the mission.
We're visiting with E.L. Morton, Campbell County Mayor, but we're talking about General Steiner today. You're a Lieutenant Colonel, retired U.S. Army. General Carl Steiner passed away last week, and he was over the operations, special operations of everybody, Army, Navy, Air Force.
Yes.
So when they moved in, as you mentioned a minute ago, Marines did this, the Army did that. He was at the top of the list,
yes, sir,
calling all the shots right there. With regard to General Steiner and his position, you talked about the special operations. A lot of this was behind the scenes, quiet, because he wasn't talked about a lot because of what he did. Is that the case?
Well, you don't want your enemies to know your full capabilities or what you know. And so the Special Operations Command is the agency that deals in those special pieces of information. We know that there are people who threaten the United States of America every day, and Special Operations Command keeps a folder on each one of them. And so we know where the leadership and the ideology comes from, and strategically, that's where people get their motivation to do harm toward us.
So basically, General Steiner was the enforcer for the United States.
Absolutely.
He was
worldwide.
at the top of the list.
The 82nd Airborne Division is anywhere, anytime in 18 hours. We're going to seize an airfield. Special Operations Command is even shorter. General Steiner, you could tell our professional ethic that we look at every mission we're given as officers in the United States Army is seen through the filter of analysis, mission analysis, enemy analysis, terrain analysis, analysis of our own troops, and civilians on the battlefield. So MET-TC, that's how we do it. And so every time he looks at a mission, he was so much better because of his experience. You knew how to get inside the thought cycle, and a senior leader like him is going to send you the information in bite-sized chunks under those headings. Mission analysis, what have I been told to do, and how do I evaluate it for me to tell my subordinates exactly what to do? So if you tell me to take the hill, that's a specified task.
Right.
But there may be 2 or 3 road intersections in an airport that can affect the hill. So my implied tasks are to seize the road intersections and the airfield. So he would always, the commander's analysis would always come out in terms of mission, enemy, terrain, troops, time, and civilians on a battlefield. And so those are the big components of how we put together our operations. Special operations, a little bit different, more complex. So
obviously, I was a teenager. You were just a pup. The Achille Lauro hijacking. Do you know much about that, or can you share much about that with us?
I've heard the general recount that, and that would be a special operations type thing.
Right.
But you don't see a general officer getting in the plane chasing the bad guy. That's the only time I've ever heard of that.
Now, this was Steiner doing that.
Yes, it was.
Now, this was about 1975?
He was commanding a group we called CTAF, Southern European Task Force. It's headquartered out of Italy. And they have one airborne battalion over there that is capable of seizing airfields in the Mediterranean area and up into Europe independently, but it has some special things assigned to it. And when you've got terrorists in the Mediterranean out there that are taking people hostage, we have agreements with all those NATO partners over there that we're going to be helping. And so. But I would expect that a helicopter company or an Air Force wing would have the job if a bad guy takes off in an airplane. I would not expect for my general to be the one chasing after him. And the general has aircraft. They go up in the aircraft and get really high where they can link into everybody's communication system. That's pretty common. But that's called the command and control bird. What he was doing was pursuing a bad guy. You just don't hear that. And gosh, the soldiers loved him for it. And the whole world loved him for it. Because, he assessed his mission. He assessed his enemy, the terrain. He had to have an aircraft to get to the guy, and the time. So at any given time, those variables can be, one is more important than the other. They can be all equal. But he had a time issue. And he saved time with that aircraft, and he also knew enough about his enemy to look. He's only got 6 hours worth of fuel. If I can have 6 hours worth of fuel, I'm going to know exactly where he goes in, and we've already got intelligence in these areas. We've built the folder on these guys, right? So we know the networks out there. We may not know the guy's name specifically, but we have intelligence gathering capabilities worldwide, and he was able to put that together and solve that problem and run the bad guy down.
We're paying tribute today to the late General Carl Steiner. E.L. Morton is our guest, Campbell County Mayor, but we're talking military. He's retired, U.S. Army, Lieutenant Colonel. Are you able to take us through the story of the Achille Lauro from your memory that the General shared with you?
I just remember that they had taken hostages on that ship and somehow gotten to land and taken flight, after they'd already killed somebody on board there. And we've got a major Army headquarters in Europe under which the CTAF, Southern European Task Force, is assigned. And I just remember seeing it on the news and General Stiner was right there in the middle of it. So, and I've heard him tell it, in detail. But when he talks about that, he talks about hunting the guy down and killing him.
Uh-huh.
So, as nice a guy as he was, don't ever forget the warrior in him was going to pursue his enemy to his end. And he knew how to do it. But I wasn't old enough to really digest it all. I guess I was in high school when he did that. But that made me so proud to know, man, that guy's from my hometown, and he could assign 1,000 other guys this job to go chase this bad guy, but he's the guy who can do it, and he had the resources. He was on a small jet, pursuing these guys, or it might have been a prop aircraft, I don't know, but infantry guys don't get to use jets, but here's our infantry general out there, he's going to get you on land, in the air, or at sea,
Now, about the Panama invasion, this involved the capture of Manuel Noriega. Would you think that may be at the top of the list of his accomplishments with regard?
Sure. And that was an 18th Airborne Corps operation, so when he was commanding it at Fort Bragg. So I eventually made it back to Ranger School, and I had one more phase to go in Dugway, Utah, and we're getting some intelligence fed to us through the Ranger course. And they said, okay, we're going to take Christmas break, and you guys are going to come back and finish the course. You can stay here and train, or you can go home on leave. Well, that's easy. I'm going on leave. So I was actually on Caravel Mountain at my mother-in-law's house when the Panama invasion kicks off, and I'm calling Fort Bragg saying, hey, I know I'm assigned to Ranger School, but I can come back to Fort Bragg. They're like, we'll call you if we need you. But my unit was actually supporting the jump into Panama, and several of our jump masters actually jump mastered the units into Panama, but did not jump. Had they been designated as one of the units, they would have recalled me. So I actually got to watch it like you and see that, but know exactly what was going on. And so you had the 82nd Airborne go in and take the airfields, and you had a separate infantry battalion in Panama already assigned down there. And then they flowed troops from Fort Polk, Louisiana, the 5th Mechanized Division, and then some troops out of Fort Stewart, Georgia. Just a few mechanized units out of Fort Polk and Fort Stewart. And actually, the story goes that General Schwarzkopf was a little peeved that he didn't get a bigger slice of the pie, because I think he was commanding Fort Stewart or Fort Hood, I can't remember, but he wanted to inject more mechanized units. And in a place like Panama, you run a real high risk of getting a lot of heavy vehicles stuck. So the 82nd actually had an armored reconnaissance vehicle. It was about a 30-ton vehicle that we dropped under parachutes, very large parachutes.
Wow.
But I think some of those are still stuck in the mud today in Panama. So there's only limited use for those. So the wheeled vehicles, the Humvee, was about as heavy as you could go in that environment and be maneuverable. So, but we had a jungle warfare school in Panama for several years. Troops stationed down there. We understood the land, so right. We trained in it. So we knew the compartmentalized terrain. We knew the steep terrain. We knew the outlets to the sea. We knew the ports. We knew the airfield. So that was almost textbook lock it down and isolate and go after the leadership, which they did, and so guys got the palace over there and he's going to defend it. So you take down the exterior units, and so that was textbook 82nd Airborne Division, 18th Airborne Corps. And it in a pretty small piece of land, relatively small. So we were built to do that, and the general knew those capabilities and knew the flight time, and he jumped in and led his troops, and they had confidence in him, and there was just nothing they couldn't do down there. I mean, it was over pretty quick.
Well, I was going to ask you about the time frame. We're visiting with E.L. Morton, talking about General Carl Steiner in our tribute today here on WLAF. What kind of time are we talking about for them to strike and then go ahead and get their target?
Anywhere in the world, 18 hours, we're going to take an airfield. So templated that. We've got to suppress the enemy's air defense. So the Air Force is going to do that for us. So they're going to fly missions. Everybody on the ground is going to know we're coming, because when we start taking out the air defenses, they explode. We're sending bombs in on them, and we're sending strike missiles. So that's coming in about 3 to 4 hours before our paratrooper planes get over the drop zone and start dropping. But we're going to keep pressure on them. But the aircraft are going to come to 500 feet off the ground. So we're going to let the Air Force come from high, and then they're going to escort our aircraft in, and then you've got to lift fire and stop shooting the artillery and the missiles long enough for our paratrooper aircraft to get in. So, but we had some helicopters down there. So when the Air Force stopped their pieces, you could integrate helicopters to come in on the flanks of the drop zones and suppress where the enemy might be responding to you. But you come in, nap of the earth, we call it. So you're at 500 feet. So they're not going to know exactly when you're going to hit, but they know you want that airfield, so they're going to defend it some. But we've already beat it up pretty good. We didn't beat up the airfield. We beat up the perimeter where the defenses are. So 500 feet, you don't even jump a reserve parachute at 500 feet. It doesn't have time to deploy. So we're banking on that main parachute going in. So when your general's jumping with you, you got to do it, right?
Well, that brings to mind there is a piece of equipment that you parachute with.
Yes, sir.
Known, I guess this
the
was
Steiner Aid. Yes,
okay,
sir. So
explain that to us.
So, we're going to be as secretive as we can, but at the point when the aircraft are over the drop zone and you've got paratroopers coming out, the enemy within earshot knows you're there. So we jump in the dark, but we have to assemble together, because Alpha Company is going to go get the road intersection to the northeast. Bravo Company is going to get the one to the northwest. And then, Delta Company is going to go to the police station in town and make sure somebody's not taking the weapons out of there and come in. Different objectives out there. Somebody else got to take the hill. Well, we learned in World War II at Normandy, we scattered troops everywhere, and none of them could link up with their own units, but they could meet other paratroopers and move to the sound of the guns. Well, we've gone through iterations since World War II and figured out if we assemble, we will risk assembling and spend some time doing that, but we will be more effective to deploy with the people that we trained with. So General Steiner's solution to that was, look, we're going to run a chem light flag up about 15 feet off the ground so it can be seen from different places.
So you have a target.
So you've got an assembly site.
Gotcha.
So Alpha Company's going to assemble up here in the northeast corner, because they got to go get the road intersection 2 miles out on the northeast corner. And so the Steiner Aid kind of happened then. And the chem lights would be about 2 feet long. You crack them and you put them into this woven flag that was porous. You could see through it from a distance. But the chem lights, you would have the A for Alpha Company, the B in chem light configuration. So
this was your communication with each other.
Yes, absolutely. It allowed us to assemble so much quicker, because the drop zones we're using are all going to be 4,000 feet long. You can imagine Campbell County Airport, Tommy C. Steiner Airfield, is the airfield you got to get. So it's 4,000 meters long, or 2.5 miles long. So you've got paratroopers dropping in a lot of different places. But to get them assembled, you don't want to put first squad all on the same aircraft, because if the aircraft goes down, you've lost all first squad. Mm-hmm. So you cross level. And I'm going to have 2 guys from first squad on the first aircraft, 2 guys on the second,
okay.
2. So they're going to be strewn up and down that drop zone, and they know they're looking for the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, or Delta signal in the chem light. So the company executive officer usually jumped into Steiner Aid in a case with him, and his job, no matter where he was, even if it wasn't pinpoint, if you got to a certain amount of time, you put Steiner Aid up and we assembled on it and moved out and got our objective from there.
So is the Steiner Aid still in existence today? Still in use?
I think it's still in use, yes. Mm-hmm. So you sacrifice some, surprise by putting chem lights up out there, but like I said, we've already suppressed their enemy air defenses. Mm-hmm. We've got aircraft above. As soon as our transport aircraft dump out the paratroopers, then the Air Force aircraft come in back over the top of us, and we can use them to call strikes on other objectives.
And then, of course, being more effective because you've been able to assemble.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're talking about the General Carl Steiner today here on WLAF. E.L. Morton is our guest. Mm-hmm. He is retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel. Mm-hmm. With regard to favorite stories, do you have some favorite Carl Steiner stories that you like to share?
Well, the Panama story is probably the biggest one, and then the time he came over to inspect my displays was just, Colonel Murdoch said he termed it the pucker factor's real high on this one, and so General Steiner came over to inspect our expo there, like I described, but he actually put people at ease. We had All-American Week. Once a year, you have All-American Week at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and you got to spit shine your boots and wear your starched uniform at that point in time for the rehearsals. And on Friday, we're going to have a big division-level parade. Well, General Steiner is the senior paratrooper on Fort Bragg, and so the 82nd Airborne Division commander, General Johnson, is actually going to march in front of the division and pass and review in front of General Steiner. And, man, we marched down Ardennes Street to the parade field on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday. And we all got up, did PT that morning, went for a 4-mile run, all that. And so we're trying to hydrate. And it's July in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And there's no bill on the cap of a beret. So we're out there marching. And you didn't get it right, do it over again. When you tell that to 12,000 people, line back up and let's do it over again. So General Steiner is going to inspect the troops. He's going to troop the line. Then he's going to take the podium, and we're going to pass and review all 14,000 troops in the 82nd Airborne Division out there. And he gets up there and says, General Johnson, your troops have done a great job. He said, but I think they're dehydrated. And he said, every one of them's got a canteen out there, and I want y'all to stop what you're doing and get a drink of water. He felt sorry for us. We've been baking out in that sun, and our faces were hard as leather out there. But he cared about his troops, and he knew we had to do All-American Week. We had old troopers from World War I that would come back for All-American Week that had served with Alvin York. And, we would do the division run up to the Corps headquarters where General Steiner was and come back down Longstreet Road. And, but yeah, he made us all take a break and take a drink of water out there that day. I think he kind of felt sorry for us. So.
Did he get a lot of mileage out of the fact that he was a caring general like that?
All of it. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of generals that didn't have what he had. They were capable, but didn't have the personal relationship abilities, Do
you think that's a LaFollette Campbell County trait that he's learned here?
That is something that we're all proud of, because he never changed. Came back home from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and he was Grand Marshal for our 4th of July parade that we had for all of our veterans. And his high school classmates would just throng him, and that's Carl Wade. I know him. And gosh, he just loved on him. But demanding general, warfighter, fight to the death kind of war fighter, committed to destroying his enemies, but professional, and he never lost the love of God in what he was doing. I thought when I went to the Army I was going to have to learn how to cuss real hard, and, be brash and be a type A and all that stuff, and I was glad to see competent leaders that didn't do that loved their soldiers and took care of them. And that's one of the first things you had to learn. Those soldiers are yours. The country has trusted you to lead them, whether you're a fire team leader in charge of 3 other soldiers or whether you're corps commander in charge of 80,000. They're yours to love and train and prepare, and then they're yours to look at and ask to go out and sacrifice everything they've got for their country, up into including their lives. And so he took that seriously, and he never was out of sorts. Not in our presence, but I don't think he ever was anyway.
We're talking about General Carl Steiner with E.L. Morton today, a retired lieutenant colonel, U.S. Army. His stubbornness, where did that play into his advantage?
Well, I mean, at some point it's the immovable object versus the irresistible force. And he was the irresistible force. We're in our minds as infantry warfighters, we're not static. If we got to hold the hill, I'm not just staying on the hill. I'm going to have an active defense. I'm going to have something on the next terrain feature, and I'm going to be able to affect the enemy before he gets right in my face. But we're offensive in nature, and so he understood the resources and had trained his soldiers well enough to know their capabilities. And there have been days when I thought my soldiers were at the end of what they could do,
right,
and they did more. Well, he'd been around a lot longer than I had, and he'd seen it in Vietnam. And, when you hear stories about Hamburger Hill or LZ X-ray, those were challenges that nobody could put in context until you were there. And the sacrifice and the level of commitment it took to overcome those challenges and that enemy. And General Stiner was in 4th Infantry Division in Central Highlands. I mean, terrible firefights, days on end, napalm, just tunnels, all of that. What we used to call asymmetrical warfare, but no quit in the American soldier, and General Stiner believed that. And so, stubborn. When we celebrated the 10th anniversary for naming the American Job Center after Tom Steiner, I made a few comments and talked about a guy who's shot down 3 times and escapes and evades out of the jungle. I said, he's just ornery enough to do it. And Tom said, well, I've never been called ornery before. I said, well, I meant it in the nicest way, Tom. Well, I guess that runs in the family with the Steiners. They don't give up, and so if there's some stubbornness in there, thank God,
Yeah. When now Joe Bollinger shared this story with me a few years back. I guess we were talking about Tom, doing some stories on Tom, Tom Steiner, General Steiner's brother, who was the full bird colonel.
Yeah.
And he said that Tom had been trying to get some requisitions. He'd signed the form, sent them in, and what he was requesting just wasn't coming. And finally, he did not sign that requisition, Colonel Tommy C. Steiner. He just signed it Steiner. And he said that equipment, that was filled and came very quickly.
Yeah, invoking your brother's name is probably a good technique when the irresistible force meets the immovable object there. So,
well, one of my favorite stories about the general, I guess, just to show his commonness, he had traded vehicles, and David Willoughby, his brother-in-law, called me from Kane Ford. He said, you need to come down here. I've got something for you. I said, okay. So David had held the general's Explorer for me. He said, you want this? I said, okay. So the general bought a new vehicle, and so I got his used Explorer and drove it for years. And finally, I was around him one day close enough where I could just talk a little bit. I said, General, I love this Explorer. He said, well, I do too. He said, Sue wanted a new vehicle, and I didn't. I said, well, I've got to ask you. I said, on the driver's side door, on the outside, it looks like maybe there's been a chemical reaction with the paint or something. He said, I've got this cow that used to used to go over there and lick that door all the time. Is what that is. So I thought, here, a 4-star general is telling me a story about his cow licking his SUV. So.
Well, when you spend time out there between the rows on the farm and working with 1,500-pound animals that have minds of their own, that's good preparation for soldiering. I mean, you get the endurance, the toughness, and you get to look at the end of that row for a long time before you get there, and so that's part of the, the resolve that the soldiers got to have out there, because whatever it takes,
When you understand this, and as an average bear, I don't, being non-military. I was born on a military base, but that's as far as it goes for me. What did we have here in General Stiner? Can you put that into words here in our community, La Follette, Campbell County?
Exemplary. Christian. American to the core. Family. Father, husband. Hero but humble. Just the fabric of the very best of America. A friend. I mean, sitting around the table at Big O's at breakfast. I don't know where the other 4 stars are doing that. Not a knock on anybody else, but what a special connection. To maintain for 85 years of life. That never changed. Farmer, animal husbandry major.
Well, that's where he was headed at Tennessee Tech, and then the ROTC, he caught the bug.
Yeah. So, just the very best of all of Campbell County, and the very best of all the United States Army, and his privates and his sergeants and his officers. I was a lieutenant when I served under him, and just he was the standard. He was the standard of excellence, and he demanded it and built it. And he didn't expect perfection to show up on the doorstep. He expected America's finest to show up on the doorstep, and if they tried, he would make something of them, and we would succeed together.
Well, we've talked about General Steiner for the better part of an hour here. Let's talk about his wife, Sue. What kind of individual, what kind of woman does it take to support and be married to a man all these years through all this, all the danger, all the wars?
Army wives are God's gift, and Sue is exemplary, an example of the very best of them. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 pages worth of assignments, and that's a move every time. That's pack everything you own and move every time. Army wives are God's gift, I'm telling you.
So the wife is in charge of that.
Half the time you're not there.
Yeah, that's it.
If you're deployed, it's got to happen. And our wives bond together closely, but when you get in the car and leave, it's just you and your children, and all the love that you can give them, and the heartbreak for the relationships you're leaving, and somehow these Army wives like Sue, they actually get excited about looking forward and reestablishing and building a home for their family. And then she comes here and helps Lanston run pyro shows, So Army wives like Sue, they have no quit in them either, and they are our foundation. If I didn't know my wife was backing me when I was in Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Korea or Afghanistan, I don't think I could put my heart in it. And Sue had that for General Stiner, and still does.
What do you think Sue's impact and the General's impact were on pyro shows? Lanston can't say enough. Lanston Hill.
Just the credibility to have that kind of leadership in your organization when you go worldwide to talk to people, and to know that Well, we've got leadership in our company that has served in Southwest Asia. Has been to China, has been to Europe. We understand the road networks. We understand how we're going to get in and out of these different sites. We understand the protocol of who we need to go through. That's just instant credibility, and Lanston's wise enough to know that.
Right.
And the general was, adept enough to grasp it quickly, because we all think Pyro Shows is a great company here in La Follette, and it is. But it's a great company in Japan. It's a great company in Texas. It's a great company in Australia, wherever you need to shoot. And so that's a broader kind of thinking than most of us have to do on a day-to-day basis. And
would you credit Carl and Sue?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to take anything away from Lanston, because he got started, on his own. But a lot of wisdom in adding that kind of leadership perspective. And then, of course, you got Tom flying you around out there too. So, mm-hmm. This aviator out there, it's not going to say quit either. So, but it's my wife actually escorted Sue at our wives' coffee at first the 505 at Fort Bragg, and she was told that, well, they're from your hometown, so you're going to need to escort the general's wife. And she was as gracious and kind as anybody you ever met when she came down to 1st Battalion, 505th Infantry Wives Group. And so Elaine fell in love with her just like everybody does. She's a wife, a mom, an Army wife of the highest caliber.
Wow. Carl Steiner, Sue Steiner, Mayor, Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for taking time. We've got about a minute left. Could you sum up this career? Maybe some final thoughts for us?
You're not going to see another one. We've got some great leaders in ranks, but not with the set of values that the general brought. The relationship he had with everybody from private to seaman to airman to the highest ranks across all services and Pentagon. I haven't seen a leader of that capability. You see a lot of folks converting into experts on news channels from the general officer ranks, but they never felt as real as General Steiner. He was the real deal, and I don't think there's going to be another one. We love him and miss him. In the airborne discussion, we always sign off with airborne, and the greeting and the response is all the way. And our little saying is keep your feet and knees together, and we'll see you on the drop zone. So, airborne all the way, General Steiner.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy day to come and, again, talking about one of your heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Easy to do, General Carl Steiner. What role will you play, if any, tomorrow during the services?
I'm just going to be a soldier and salute the flag when it comes by, and miss my friend and my general. That's all I know to do. But I think that's what soldiers should be doing. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, soldier, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel, retired E.O. Morton, Campbell County Mayor.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you so much to talk about the General Carl Steiner.